Today I'm going to be making a meal that I make often. I've been making it since Matt and I was first married, and I actually grew up eating it. It was a meal that Granny made often. She actually still makes it today. So it's something that's just a very comforting meal for us. It's a meal that everyone likes, and it's pretty easy to do, as you might imagine, since I've been making it for the last almost 30 years now. It's a very simple meal. It's just stew beef, potatoes, cornbread, slaw. Today I have green beans that I had over the weekend, a big pot of green beans, so I'm going to have that. So as you can see, it's very just simple food, but so tasty and so filling. When I was growing up, Granny made her stew beef on top of the stove, on a stove eye in a pot. And I've made mine like that probably in the beginning, but today I just prefer putting it in the crock pot. So that's the part I'm going to do right now this morning, and then later in the day I'll finish out the supper as it gets closer to supper time. But there's so many different ways of doing stew beef, and everyone just kind of has to find their own way. I made mine exactly like Granny's for many years, and then I kind of figured out what I liked best, you know, and then I changed it a little bit. So that's just personal preference. A lot of people put not just potatoes in their stew beef, but they'll put onions and they'll put carrots. I usually don't do that. I did sometimes, maybe in the beginning, but today mine is just super simple. And again, it's just personal preference, so you'd have to find out. So what I start with is you got to have your stew beef, of course. So I've got some out of the freezer and let it thaw up, and now I'm ready to put it in the crock pot. So I already have my crock pot on warm, or on low. It's kind of warm. And I've already seasoned my stew beef. I just use salt and pepper. Now you can use any other kind of seasoning you want, but like I said, I'm just doing it a very simple, this is just what we like. So I go ahead and put my roast beef, or my beef stew in there. And sometimes I add liquid, and then sometimes I don't add liquid. It just depends on that day of what I'm feeling. But today, if I do add liquid, usually what I add is I have some beef broth that I've had on hand. So I'm just going to add a little bit of it, and not much. I'm not going to cover it or anything like that. I'm just going to add some in the bottom there. And then I'm going to put the lid back on it, and I'm going to let it cook for several hours till it's almost basically done, and then I'm going to add my potatoes. Some people put their potatoes in, you know, right when they put the meat in, and that works great, and especially if you're not going to be at home that day, that's something that you could do. But I kind of prefer to let the meat cook, and because I am home, and then take it out and then put the potatoes and put the meat back on top of it. I like for my potatoes not to get so mushy, so that's how I like to do it, but either way works fine. So I decided to make some really quick no-bake cheesecakes. I have a video, I'll link to that, so if you want to see how to make them, you can. Usually I would make a homemade graham cracker crust like in a springform pan, but today I don't have time, but I do want to make them, so I'm just using store-bought graham cracker crust. And you can top them once I'm gonna put them in the refrigerator, and once they firm up, you can top them with whatever you want to, but we don't top them, we just eat them just like this. So my meat's been cooking a few hours now, and I'm gonna scoop it out. It smells really good. And then I've got some potatoes cut up that I'm going to put in. And in the broth, you can see the broth I added, and then the meat, of course, has added some juice too. I'm going to salt and some pepper. And then I'm going to put the meat back on top. And let it continue cooking. So I'm about to start making the slaw, but first I'm going to go ahead and put my cornbread pan in the oven. So I'm using bacon grease today to really grease the inside of it, and then I'm going to let it come to heat in the oven, and then I'll put the cornbread batter in it. I'm just going to trim out the outer leaves, trim off the outer leaves. So there's lots of fancy slaw recipes out there, and I've tried a lot of them, but most of the time I just make my slaw like Granny made it when I was growing up, which is very simple, with just cabbage and mayonnaise to taste and salt and pepper, a little dash of milk, and a tiny pinch of sugar. I can never chop up cabbage though without eating some. I love it. I actually prefer my slaw on the coarse kind of side, but this cabbage has been in my fridge for a little while, and even though I didn't mean for it to, it really chopped up very finely. Of course, that's just personal preference, how you like it. I like my slaw actually about like that, but it's not going to be that way today. Everyone has their favorite kind of mayonnaise. A lot of times in the South and in Appalachia, it's Duke's. Duke's is what people's crazy about. And I don't mind it, but I prefer Hellmann's. Some pepper. Salt. Pinch of sugar. The smallest amount of milk. I have to have a taste. Good. Normally I would prefer to make my slaw early in the day or even the day before to kind of let it all marry together, but sometimes you just can't help it. You got to do stuff at the last minute. cornbread's done, we'll be ready to eat. Looks good. Matt, it's ready.
Where's Katie's computer?
So now I'm going to show you my favorite way to eat stew beef. I have to get my cornbread, crumble it all up in my plate. It's really hot too. And then I like to put it on top, especially with that great juice in the bottom. All that wonderful with some potatoes. That wonderful juice just goes perfectly with cornbread. So good. I was lucky that I had some green beans I'd made over the weekend. Usually I wouldn't have green beans with this meal, but we're still eating on a big pot of green beans I made. Ones we grew in our garden last year. So those will be good. And then I don't know why, but I think slaw goes so well with stew beef. Maybe because Granny always had it with her stew beef. I don't know, but I just think it goes perfect. Then I've got some lovely squash pickles that I made last year. That'll be wonderful. Goes good. It's like a taste of summer right on your plate. And some pickled beets. It's almost time for beets again. I've got beets growing under my grow lights in the living room. So a very simple meal, but one that we really enjoy and that I've been making for many years here in the mountains of Appalachia where I live. So I hope you enjoyed seeing one of the meals that we eat often, and I hope as always you'll continue to drop back by and help me celebrate Appalachia.
Oh, we got a pie?
Yeah.
What kind of pie, Mama?
Cheesecake.
What's his name off of Saturday Night Live skit? Bob, what was his last name? Me and Paul laughed so hard about it. Bob Brasstown.
I'm gonna lose it! Hey, I want a fork. I want somebody to give me a fork.
Oh,
Got potato on it.